And let's say that they actually try to plan leaving. They come up with a plan, and they have a support system in place, and they want to leave, and they've got that support system, and they've got everything lined up, right down to the appointment for when they're going to go in and get that, attempt to get that preliminary protective order. Well, when I get into court, my plan is going to be looked as though I'm trying to just get an upper hand in a custody battle, and that I'm not really scared, but in fact I'm just trying to manipulate the court system to win custody. So when they leave that house, the adventure has only just begun, because I might not get that preliminary protective order, which is only valid for 15 days. But when I go into court on a permanent protective order hearing, which is going to happen after that 15 days, I might not be granted a permanent protective order. And if I'm not granted a permanent protective order, that means my batterer can have contact with me, contact with my children, can come back into the house that I previously had exclusive use and possession of. And where does that leave me? Do I go back to that home? Do I go into the shelter? Do I try to go someplace else? How am I going to support myself? How am I going to support my kids? And this becomes an even more complicated situation if there are immigration issues, if someone is undocumented. I find that persons who are undocumented have no incentive to try to leave their battered, their abusive situation, because usually that batterer holds the sponsorship to their citizenship. And if they're not, if the victim is undocumented and your batterer is undocumented, then in my community, I've been told that if we go to the police on this, I'm going to be deported, my batterer is going to be deported, and where does that then leave me? Because I've left a really bad situation to come to what I thought was going to be a better situation. And then are they going to take my kids away because my kids were born here in the United States? Well, what's going to happen to them? And those are just some of the decisions that people have to face. And in the other thing that people don't understand or recognize, that just because I've gotten a protective order doesn't mean I'm now safe. Because a protective order is truly nothing more than a piece of paper. Yes, it gives you remedies in both the criminal legal system and in the civil legal system, but at the end of the day, if my abuser wants to come to me and get me, they're going to do that. 50% of all protective orders that are entered are violated. Okay? And oftentimes they're not just violated one time, they're violated multiple times. And a lot of times where we can see violations of protective orders happen is when we're transferring children for visitation. And that can be a very dangerous situation. I had a client of mine, we were doing transfers at the police station, which many judges do not like doing transfers for visitation at the police station because they're concerned that kids then learn that in order to see my other parent, I have to have police presence, and are concerned as the impact that that would have on the kids. In this situation, the judge had ordered that the transfers were to take place at the police station. The transfer was taking place outside of the police station. The father of the children got into the car. My client was driving. She had come up, had shut off the car. He was waiting for her, got into the car, locked the doors, and had a knife, and held a knife up to her throat, and told her, "You're not going to leave me. You'll never leave me." And that was at a police station.
What happened?
He told her to drive. She did. He then got out, had her get out at another location. She did. When he went out to go try to get the kids out of the car, the kids had actually jumped into the front seat of the car and had gotten out of Mom's side. Mom and the kids ran into a public store, and then they went and called the police. But by the time that all of this had gone down and the police had come to the scene, the dad had taken off. And Dad had, of course, denied everything that had happened. And we had her word against his word. And a court saying, I can't do anything because I don't have enough evidence to convince me that this is exactly happened. It's clear to me this is an ugly custody case, and that there's definitely problems with the transfers, but I don't know, I can't say that it rises to the level of a criminal offense. There are different rules in criminal courts than there are in civil. For me to go into a court and get a protective order, I have to prove my case by 51%. That's not too bad. 51% is kind of easy some days. Some days it's not. Criminal case, they've got to be able to prove it by 100%, and I often feel it has to be 101% with some judges to kind of give you an idea of that. That's hard. Also, when you start to go into, when you do call law enforcement, and you do get into the system, whether it be the criminal justice system or the civil system, a person ends up having to tell their story on a minimum of 5 times. That's really hard to do because it's really painful. And there is an enormous amount of shame that comes along with that story. I can't tell you how many of my clients, and I represent both men and women who have been victims, how did I get myself into this situation? How did I find myself here? He was never like this. She was never like this in the beginning. She was so caring and so nice to me. He made me feel so good about myself. I felt like I was on top of the world. I was the queen of the world and he was my king. And then he just started with saying things to me that just came out of the blue. And then it was a push or a shove or the pulling of the hair. And it was every single time I wondered, what did I do? What did I do to cause this? What did I do? And just again, I can't stress enough just the turmoil that so many people face when trying to leave the situation, especially when there are children in there. It makes it that much more difficult. One of the other myths that people don't understand is just because you can get a protective order against your batterer, that doesn't mean that the batterer's not going to have contact with the kids. And it doesn't mean that you're never going to have to see that batterer again. Courts have found that while a person could have been physically, mentally, and emotionally violent to another parent, that doesn't mean that that person who did those horrible acts should be denied access to their child. Many courts have this belief that children do better when both parents are actively involved in that child's life, regardless of what that parent has done, either to the other parent or to the children themselves. There have been cases that I have had that have been some of my most challenging, where there have been disclosures of inappropriate touching by a parent who's also been physically abusive to the other parent, and multiple protective orders have been entered. And judges saying, well, he's gone to counseling now. We need to work on reunification. We need to get this parent back with this child, and we need to make sure that this can happen. And no, they don't have to take accountability for what they've done to the other parent or for what they've done to the child. We just have to reunite. We need to reunite them. And that's very hard for a person who has been abused by somebody else to say, why do I have to turn my child over to this person and be positive about it and foster a relationship between my child and this person who has done horrible things to me? Those are just some of the struggles and some of the myths that go on. One of the things, pardon me, I've never really been one for statistics because to me it's just numbers, and when I often hear statistics I often kind of have like the Charlie Brown cartoon in my head when adults are talking, wah, 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 wah. It just is. I don't know. But when I was kind of getting my thoughts organized for today, I was just amazed at the increase in domestic violence, the increase in the issuance of emergency protective orders, the increase in the entry of preliminary protective orders and permanent protective orders. And just for those of you who may not know, in the state of Virginia, a permanent protective order can only be granted for up to 2 years. And after that 2 years, you may now, it was recently enacted in July of 2010, you may now go in to petition the court to ask for an extension. Prior to July of 2010, you would have to have had a violation of that protective order in order to renew the protective order. One of the barriers or issues that come up with this, when you ask for that protective order to be extended, the judges are going to say, why? Why do I need to extend it? Did he have contact with you? Did she violate the terms of the protective order? You're asking me to impose restrictions on this person's liberty. Why? They've left you alone. There hasn't been a problem. There hasn't been anything. And you have a petitioner saying, I feel scared. I'm afraid. I don't know what's going to happen if I don't have this. He's been on the good behavior, or she's been on good behavior because this piece of paper has been in place. And it's a big hurdle. It's a really big hurdle to come into play. One of the other, I need to go back for a second before I hit you with some statistics. One of the other things as an attorney that's really, really frustrating is that many judges, and I do feel that we've made a lot of improvements in training our judges and helping them to understand domestic violence, but there is still a large number of judges that when you're putting on a case that say, I just can't find that family abuse has occurred because there hasn't been a police report filed and I have no pictures of any injuries. So because those things are lacking, I'm not going to find family abuse. However, I find so-and-so to be very credible in her testimony and what she said. But because I don't have anything else to back it up, I'm not comfortable making that finding. Well, think about it. I'm sure each one of us in this room has experienced some tragedy or another. How many of you during that tragedy has thought about, I need to get a camera and photograph this. I need to go get my neighbors together to come over and check this out. Those who've just been in a car accident can't even think about that. I was working with a family who, when they went to go get the children from the paternal grandparents' house, an altercation happened between the paternal grandfather and my client. And my client's mom was there. And it was a pushing, shoving, smackdown type of an altercation that happened. And when I was talking with my client's mother, she goes, I had my cell phone in my hand, and I couldn't remember what number to dial to get the police. She goes, I knew there was a number. I couldn't think about it at that time. My instinct was I have to protect my daughter and my grandkids, and I'm trying to do that and trying to get help at the same time, and I can't remember this. And what was very interesting, because finally when the police did come to that house and stuff, the grandmother had used a word and said that the paternal grandfather had hit her in the chin. And the police officer didn't find her to be credible because there was no red marks or anything like that. And the grandmother, when I was talking to her about this, saying, hey, the police officer's got this concern here, he's determining that really nothing has happened, that perhaps you're not telling the truth. She goes, Megan, I was in such a state of, I can't believe this just happened, in shock. I didn't realize. She goes, yeah, did he hit me like a full-blown punch? No. Did he make contact with me? Yes. He hit me here. I said, well, was it really? I go, when you say hit to me, I'm thinking of a punch. I'm thinking of definite contact. She goes, no. She goes, it was like he hit me here. I go, I understand you keep using this word hit, but is it really a hitting like this? And she goes, no. She goes, he touched me. He made contact with me. I said, so what really happened was a grazing. You were grazed by him, weren't you? What's a grazing? And I'm like, where he's made contact with you, but it's not a full-blown force hit. It's not a direct contact hit. And she goes, well, is that what you want to call it? Fine, call it that. And when I went back to the police officer, his words were, she said hit. Now she's trying to recant her story. And I said, when you interviewed her at the height of all of this happening, to her, yes, it was a hit because he made contact. Is it a hit like you and I are thinking? No. But you and I do this every single day. She doesn't.